Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our YouTube channel. I am Dr. Elham Raker from Ask Dr. Mom. And today I'm talking to Dr. Funke Brown. She is a sleep specialist and here to answer all those really tough sleep questions. You can find her at Restful Sleep MD, and I'm going to let her do a little bit more of an introduction. And I'm very excited to have her on because if you guys know me and follow me, you know how important sleep is to me and what a big part it is of being healthy.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. And yeah, I am Dr. Funke Brown. I do have a YouTube channel as well. It's Dr. Funke Brown. It's easy to find. And also I am at Restful Sleep MD on Instagram. And one of my passions as a sleep expert and a pediatric pulmonologist really is educating people on prioritizing sleep for themselves and for their children. I would say I am a pediatric sleep expert, but then I realized that when children don't sleep, then their parents don't sleep. So I am definitely passionate about helping the entire family sleep.
100%.
Yeah.
I am on board with that.
Yep.
So since I have an expert on, and I wanted to give you kind of the hard stuff to talk about. And we came up with a great topic of what to do when sleep hygiene doesn't work. So the routine and the, consistent bedtimes and all the things that we kind of talk about, that is truly very important. But, parents say we've done all that, but it's still not happening. So let's go through what your tips are.
Absolutely. I think that's what I see. Most of the time, by the time families come to me, they've done it all. They've read the books. They've, hired a sleep coach. They've done everything in that sense. And usually when people come and say everything, it is those sleep hygiene, which is very important. It's really important to incorporate that. But then you then start to get to a stage where, okay, the child is no longer in the crib, still wants mom to be present or wakes up for prolonged periods of time at night and needs help falling back asleep. Or, even in teenagers with school and then their devices and their mind can't shut down. So there's just such a wide spectrum. And so I think one of the very important things that I do when they come in, they're like, and this and this and this and this, and we can't take it anymore. It's like, okay, let's start from the beginning. And so the very first thing I want to find out is, where do you have the main sleep problem? Is it at the beginning of the night? Is it in the middle of the night? Is it at the end of the night? Is it excessive sleeping? Is it sleeping in random places? So I think those are really important to key in, because again, families are overwhelmed. And, so I just kind of help them, okay, let's deconstruct this. And so that's where I start from. And typically when things start, for example, most patients may come in and say, I have difficulty falling asleep. And then I have to still take them through, what's your bedtime routine like? And sometimes it may be that they're not following it consistently. It may be that they're in two different homes. It may be that, things just completely fall to the wayside on the weekends. And so that really can affect, their sleep. And so that's essentially what I do. And then based on that, we can target intervention for it. And, by the time children come, again, we have this umbrella of sleep problems that are essentially what we call behavioral sleep problems. That's just one bucket of sleep problems. And that's exactly what I tell my patients. If you kind of look at sleep, we deal with it in three distinct buckets. And I learned this from one of my mentors, Jody Mindell. And so essentially the first bucket are those essentially behavioral sleep buckets. And I tell them, it's not that your child has bad behavior, they've just gotten into habits, right? And then the second bucket are the medical sleep problems. And then the third bucket, the way I put it, is those problems that are present during the day, that are also present at night, right? If you have a child who's anxious, if you have a child with a developmental disorder, if you have a child with, ADHD or autism, it's there. It's just manifests. It has its nighttime manifestations as well. So
Yeah.
when we tease that out, that really then helps to focus on what exactly we need to do, what exactly the problem is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I love that you're looking at the whole, kind of like the whole day, right? Because
Yeah.
even with babies, when I do like my sleep training, I always start with what time they wake up in the morning and walk me through the schedule, because one thing can totally affect another.
Yeah.
And then as kids get older, their diet, I imagine, could also, right, be a part of it. If there's caffeine intake, which a lot of people don't think about because they could be having a lot of chocolate,
Yeah.
and people don't think of that as caffeine. So I think it's really important to, break it down, almost like minute by minute, or hour by hour, is what's going on, to not just look at that night by itself.
Yeah, I agree. And most people come in, they just want to fix it. They want to fix it. And sometimes it's going back to the bedtime routine,
Mm-hmm.
to really be able to determine, okay, this is what we need to address first before we go to the next step. Um, and and so, for example, like you mentioned, people don't even realize, like, iced tea in the evening, they don't know until we have a little, iced tea with dinner. And then you're like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
that's something we need to address. So again, as we're dealing with it, we're still looking at those different steps or those different sleep hygiene. Like, an example I would say is, think about a teenager with during COVID, right? For
Mm-hmm.
me, I have a 12-year-old who at some point they were virtual. So school was in the bedroom, school was on the bed. And so the
Mm-hmm.
bed, that's one thing, but it's still sort of sleep hygiene, because then the
Yep.
bed is your bedroom, the bed is your dinner table, the bed is your
Yep.
cinema. And so the brain makes associations. The brain makes those associations such that when it's nighttime, because they've been laying in bed and doing all these other things in bed, when it's really now time to shut down, they have a hard time. And I see that a lot in teenagers. And
Mm-hmm.
so, sometimes just by the time we go through the evaluation, that's all it is. They're going to bed at
Mm-hmm.
the right time, they're shutting down their devices at the right time, but all day they've been doing all kinds of things in their rooms and in their beds, and
Mm-hmm.
occasionally they may be napping. So that in and of itself really decreases your sleep drive, and so then it's time for bed and you just can't sleep. And so that's another thing that's there. And I love what you mentioned about, like, what's the day like? What's parenting like? Is it hard to, are there limit setting issues, where already you have, a very feisty toddler who likes to have his way, then at night likes to have his way too. And,
Right.
you're doing everything right,
Totally.
but he's just, or he or she's just like kind of pushing the envelope. No, I don't want to go to bed. And everybody's just stressed out because everybody's exhausted. And then you're just doing whatever you need to do to survive. Okay, whatever, just come to bed with me, or just
Mm-hmm.
take this piece of candy and I'll bribe you, whatever it
Yeah.
takes.
Whatever it
And
takes.
so,
Totally. We've
exactly.
all been there.
Yes, 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 yes. So that's the thing. Really, that's it. And then, of course, again, like I mentioned, you just have children with ADHD or autism or other um, neurodevelopmental issues where their brains are just developing differently. So
Right.
their circadian rhythm is a little bit different. So if you have a 6-year-old who typically would, typically developing, that might fall asleep at, I don't know, 8 p.m. And
Mm-hmm.
for a child who has, ADHD, autism, they may not be able to fall asleep until much later. So really
Mm-hmm.
teasing those things out as well will
Right.
definitely help with figuring out what is what and what do we need to target.
Right. And another thing I talk about is, we look at the overall sleep and the amount of hours,
Yeah.
but more importantly is, how are the kids acting during the day? Are they happy and playing and eating normally and doing all the things? Then they're probably getting enough sleep. Whereas, are they cranky? Are they, even hyperactive, right? And kids can sometimes show up opposite, where they have more energy and just not able to kind of follow along. So that's another thing I talk with, and I'm sure you do too.
Yeah,
Not to get too focused on the hours and oh my God, they didn't sleep enough last night,
I
but just
know.
are they doing okay?
Yeah, and that's such an important point. And for me, the other thing, when I look at sleep as well, which is why I called my company Restful Sleep, because the focus is not so much on the hours. That's important. So for me, I think about sleep in terms of a good quantity. So of course, the National Sleep Foundation, the American Academy of Pediatrics provides recommended number of hours of sleep, which it's such a wide range. You have,
Right.
newborns who are sleeping from 14 to 17 to,
Right.
toddlers and who may be sleeping anywhere from, 11 to 13, so there's a
Yeah.
range of that. So you might have a child who's on the lower end of that range. And so the quantity is good to follow, but we shouldn't be so stuck on just the quantity. The other piece is the quality of sleep. Are they waking up exactly like you said, cranky in the morning? So they've slept those 13 hours or whatever, but they're still cranky or just really having a lot of learning issues, inattention, or if they're older, actually feeling sleepy during the day. So those things really helps you see that, okay, maybe the quality of sleep is off. And it's interesting, again, the kind of things that can affect the quality of our sleep are, if you take caffeine or if you're on the screen. So again, so you're constantly looping in those hygiene tips as well. Or so that's the quantity, the quality. And then I also talk about the continuity of sleep. So how is the sleep? Is it fragmented? Is it fragmented because there's an underlying medical disorder? So if you have sleep apnea where you're snoring and having pauses and your brain is arousing every time to breathe, or restless leg syndrome, right? If your legs are moving around so because of the discomfort, where then the continuity of your sleep can be affected. Or again, asthma or other underlying medical conditions as well can affect the continuity of your sleep. So those are those three things: the quantity of sleep, the quality, as well as the continuity. And so when we tease that out, we can really tell, okay, these are the areas that we need to focus on. And also looking at what that impact is having on the daytime function.
Yeah, that's great. So, I told you I'm going to ask you the hard stuff because I have an expert. So, melatonin or other sleep aids for kids, older, well, sometimes even younger kids, but sometimes you have jet lag, or sometimes you have kids that are sick, or personally for me, my teenage kids just aren't tired until later at night, so what's a good way to either use melatonin or not use it? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So again, I think I'm a fan of melatonin, but one thing I try to get families to understand is your body is able to produce its own melatonin. So looking back to why do you need melatonin? Is it that you've been on the screens and so your melatonin production is sort of shut down because with the blue light, your brain thinks it's still daytime and so it's not able to produce it. So we try to address that. And then once we've addressed that, they're consistently following, healthy sleep habits. In some cases, then we would need melatonin. I don't typically end up needing it in children younger than 3 years old, because for children younger than 3, a lot of it is behavioral interventions, behavioral strategies, and things like that help. Even for children over 3, if you give melatonin to a toddler who's running around the house with the iPad on and all the lights on,
it's not going to work. Yeah,
so
totally.
I think when we use melatonin and we're using it to fix it all is when we're just setting ourselves to be disappointed. And so I think really, if you use it, you're still using it consistently. It's not like a get out of jail card. And so I agree with you. For a lot of the studies that have been done with melatonin is done in children with autism, with children with ADHD and other neurodevelopmental conditions where the actual melatonin production has been shown to be off. And so that's a lot of the literature we have. And so far, it seems to be well tolerable. It seems to be effective if you use it again with behavioral interventions, and it seems to be relatively safe. A few side effects like drowsiness, and some kids may have nightmares and things like that. So that's something that one has to, I usually will recommend just talk with your pediatrician as well to use it. Now, in terms of how I look at the use of melatonin, I look at it in two ways: as a chronobiotic. And when you talk about chronobiotic, it's just essentially helping you to set your circadian rhythm. Like you mentioned, like, you know, if you have a teenager who has a delayed sleep phase where their body clock because of puberty is shifted, then you can use melatonin to bring that back. And usually you use really, really low doses. We say physiologic doses. So anywhere from like 0.1 to 0.5 milligrams usually is sufficient. And really just use that. And you need that like several hours before their bedtime. Then the second, so apart from the chronobiotic, the other time you need it is for its hypnotic effect. So that's the one that we typically do use for like insomnia and things like that. In that case, you typically do need slightly higher dosing. So anywhere from 1 milligram to 6 milligrams, usually over 6 milligrams, I don't see much of a difference. And then you start to get that daytime groggy effect as well. And usually I will recommend you start really low, 1 milligram, and then maybe once a week. If you don't see the desired effects, then you try to move it up. And then, you know, the hope is that you're not needing to use it long term, especially if there's an acute change and things like that. You can eventually get the child off because, again, while it's been shown to be relatively safe, we still need studies to look at like longitudinal impact of melatonin because it's a hormone. It's a hormone. So I think that's my approach. Typically, very important to combine it with behavioral strategies. So, yeah.
Yeah. I definitely agree. And I love what you said about the dosages, because I think when you go to buy melatonin, the doses are like 3 to 5 milligrams typically, you know? So I think you naturally think like, oh, my kid is supposed to take 5 milligrams, but your natural doses are somewhere around 0.5 or less, correct?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And thanks for bringing up that piece about the dosage. So there was a study that was done, I mean, some years ago now, that showed actually that they looked at like 31 different preparations of melatonin. And what they found was the variability in the dose was anywhere from minus 83 to plus, I think, 478%.
It's crazy.
Because it's not FDA regulated. It's not FDA regulated. It's you know, it's marketed as a herbal supplement. So you may buy a bottle that says, you know, 3 milligrams of melatonin. It may have 30 milligrams in one tablet, and another one may have like point something milligrams. So what I do, if I do need to, I need to, you know, recommend that for patients, I say like, if you're using it and you notice like one brand is not working, switch the brand because it's herbal supplement. So one may have a better concentration or whatever than another. So that's usually what I
that's a very good point.
So.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. That's really helpful. And I think those are really good points. And I love how you broke it down into looking at it in different ways. You know, like the beginning of the night, the middle of the night, and the end of the night, and also looking at the whole day, because it all is affected. You know, it's just like this loop. We can't just look at it in a vacuum. So that was helpful for me. Thank you.
Welcome. I'm glad. I would say also something else that I encounter is just the home environment sometimes, right? Like sometimes if it's a very chaotic, if there's a, you know, 1-bedroom apartment with like 8 kids, you know, those are things we have to sort of take into consideration as well.
Absolutely.
As, you know, those environmental factors play a big role. And so, that's definitely something that I see as well. It's a struggle, but it's real.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, talking to parents that they've decided to co-sleep, I always, you know, I personally, I don't have an issue with co-sleeping if it's working for the family. But what I find sometimes is that the child is then going to sleep the same time as the parents, and that's not really good for the child, depending on their age, right? Like a younger child can't go to bed at 10 o'clock at night. So, you have to take those things into consideration, but also realize each child is going to need their schedule and to make it work as
Absolutely.
best you can, with what you got. So,
Yep, that is true. That is true.
yeah.
And also the expectations for the family. That's always something to be clear. Like, sometimes I say, what's your goal? What do you
Yeah.
want? Sometimes they say, I want him to sleep, 13 hours a day, and it's a 10-year-old.
Right.
So, that's mismatched. A 10-year-old, usually I use 10 by 10, right? So 10-year-old will get about 10 hours of sleep. And if you just add a little, subtract a little, you get a sense of how many hours kids need. That's my quick trick.
Yeah,
And
that's
so
great.
10 by 10. So a 10-year-old cannot sleep 13. No, I will not be able to work that magic.
Right.
So, so that's really important to set those expectations up front, and then also to help them see, like, okay, fine, you're saying he's not getting the ideal number of hours of sleep, but he's like stellar. He's like functioning. It's school. There's no issues in school, no learning problems, and so some kids are sort of short sleepers, some kids are long sleepers. The important thing is, how is this impacting everyone? How is this impacting their function? How is it impacting their family? And so that's also something that's always like, the families are like, oh, yeah, okay, and so that really helps, just coming in to have those expectations set for them.
Yeah. Well, that was awesome. Thank you. And you guys can find us on our YouTube channels for more information for me with pediatrics, with Dr. Brown about everything sleep. And thanks so much for tuning in.
Thanks for having me. Stop. Oh, there we go.